Yeah, it is. No, I don't introduce you.
Oh, that microphone.
Yeah, so actually you'll have to do, yeah,
Yeah, but for the photos, you can move forward.
yeah. So I'll go down here instead.
And then
And if you just move forward, I can
I'll
get a
try and
photo. Because what
limestone. Well. So should we shut the door?
or I can take it and actually move it through.
Which you need to follow both sides.
I'll make sure I'm near there. Yes. Okay. I will do. Shall I close the door? Good. Yeah, yeah. Good afternoon. Is that, oh, it's a bit loud. That's good. I've been told that I have to stand within a specific distance of this. Now, good evening and welcome. This is the first time for me as president of the Prehistoric Society. So a lot of the things you see initially are all the work of the previous council and the previous president who's sitting over there, Linda. So thank you very much, Linda. I'm also feeling very uncomfortable wearing bling. I don't normally wear bling, but it's the very prestigious medal that the president has to wear. The other thing I've got to say is that for those of you in the room, sorry for those on Zoom who can't be there, there's a wine reception afterwards, and it's just through there, so you won't get lost. After the lecture, apparently there are no questions formally, but Barbara can't escape because she'll be in the wine reception, so you can nobble her. But before we get to the lecture, we've got some awards to give out. And the first are for the best undergraduate dissertations in prehistory. And this was also a new experience for me, not having read an undergraduate dissertation for probably 25 or 30 years. Fascinating, all of them, and in good academic spirit. It was such a strong field. We've got 2 runners-up and 1 winner. So we'll start with the runners-up, and it's Landscape, Labour and Feasting at Alfred's Castle, Juniper Little. Yes, thumb up. And what we've also got to do is stand in a place so that Tess can take a picture so it can go on social media. Well done, thank you. And then I've got to remember how to say the name here, so I'll have to work this one out. The second runner-up is Evan Grandage, the Paz University, Cambridge, Unravelling Pakat Namu. Is that the right way of saying it? Nearly? Yeah, textiles, relationality and agency at a late intermediate period site, Peru. One of the great things about prehistory is you never know what you're going to come across next. It's such a broad field. So come on up, Evan, get your award. And then the winner is Archie Robson of Durham University, A Lost Art, digital and experimental investigation of a Mesolithic engraved stone assemblage from Rutland, Denbighshire, United Kingdom. The Welsh might prefer Wales, but anyway, never mind. Archie, come on up. Now, the next award is for the Peter Clark Award. Peter's speciality was Bronze Age boats, if I'm not mistaken. And the winner is Jackie McKinley of Wessex Archaeology for her work on osteology, and not only looking at the artifacts, but also on the ethics of studying and displaying human remains. So, Jackie, if you'd like to come up and get your award. Into the microphone so the Zoom people.
Yeah, apparently for hello Zoom people. I was told I could say a few words, and my first thanks has to go to Peter, it has to be said, who's our paths did cross occasionally, for actually putting something in place for jobbing archaeologists such as myself, because that's what I am. I'm not an academic, I'm a jobbing archaeologist. But, you know, I've spent 40 odd years studying, well, doing archaeology in the field, but also studying burial archaeology and particularly cremated remains, which when I started out, nobody was interested in because there was no bling that came with it. So people weren't that interested in that. You know, it was the poor man's, it's not the poor man's way out at all. It is a very interesting and fascinating and complex mortuary rite that we're only starting to scratch the surface of, and which I find quite fascinating. And hopefully over the years, people have got more and more interested, partly because of the work that I've done. So thank you very much for giving me this and recognising what I've done. And I'm sure there will be other people in my position who will be grateful to receive some, well, acknowledgement that they haven't wasted their entire careers. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Jackie's doing herself a disservice by saying she's just a jobbing archaeologist. I mean, one of the great things about, especially prehistory, is just how much information you can squeeze from the smallest bit of evidence, whether it's a bone or whatever else. And it reminded me of what my professor at Manchester said years ago. He was the youngest professor, I think, at the time in 1972, Barry Jones. And when he rang his mother up to say he'd been made professor at Manchester, she said, "Oh, Barry, when are you going to get a proper job?" Anyway, He went on to have a glittering career. The next one is the winner of the President's Award. I haven't checked with the former president how the president comes to do a President's Award, but the winner is Guy Schofield for the immersive digital mural that he created for the Life After the Ice exhibition opened in March 2024 at the Yorkshire Museum. So Guy, if you would like to come up.
So this was a sort of joint venture, this. And as somebody who's a kind of an imposter archaeologist, somebody who snuck into an archaeology department as an artist and interaction designer, it was a really interesting project to be part of. It was led principally by Nikki Milner, who is kind of one of the experts on Star Car, as you can imagine, and also Jess Bates, but really couldn't have taken place without York Museum's trust, and particularly Andrew Woods and Adam Parker. And it was a really fantastic opportunity to kind of see all these experts, from my point of view, in action, and bringing their opinions and their kind of knowledge to bear on a digital immersive piece of work. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Guy. And the before we get on to the final one, I mean, you raised an issue there of not a proper archaeologist. What is a proper archaeologist? There's no such thing. The best ones are those who sneak in through the back door and they actually know what to do. I remember, again, Manchester story where we used to do field studies on Offa's Dyke, and one of the volunteers was asked, all the volunteers were asked, you know, do they have a speciality or whatever? And somebody said, yeah, I used to be a physicist. And then David Hill was talking about getting some resistivity equipment or magnetometer, and he said, oh, well, I'll build you one. So literally 2 weeks later, he came back and we had our own magnetometer that he just built in his garage. So there's no right or wrong. It's fantastic to have everybody. So the final award, and we've got plenty of time. Oh, lights down a bit. It's the winner of the President's Award as well, Tom Björklund. I hope I've said his name correctly. Now, he can't be here, but he's written a page and a half. It takes 5 minutes to read, and this is going to be an interactive thing. As I'm speaking, Tess will be pressing a button and showing amazing images, which are Tom's images. But what he's written, I think, is so good, I thought, well, I'll read it out. And as we've got more than 5 minutes, I will take it slowly because I just need to make sure the commas I put in as I was reading it between Preston and Wigan this morning are in the right place. So what Tom writes is, Dear President, members of the Council and members of the Prehistoric Society, before the internet, it was not easy for an artist to reach a larger audience. For decades, I worked on a modest scale for people I knew and for a few museums and publishers. When the internet and social media platforms became more widely available, the situation changed drastically. About 10 years ago, interesting articles based on new breakthroughs in DNA research started to appear. Inspired by a study that suggested that Neanderthals were possibly as diverse as modern humans, I made a Facebook post that contained various portraits of people people with Neanderthal features. Is that someone with Neanderthal features? We don't know. It may not. It doesn't. A range of figures. Yeah, I won't comment on that. I had no idea how impactful it would be. From being followed mostly by friends and relatives, I gained thousands of new followers literally overnight. I also received a kind invitation from Dr. Tessa Macklin, who's she? To join the Prehistoric Society's Facebook group, which I believe I can thank for the sudden popularity of my posts. So congratulations, Tessa. While illustrations, even when described as scientific, may not contribute much to the research itself, visual representations are indispensable when it comes to popularizing research results, not least when depicting human origins and our physical and cultural evolution. Text and words require us to concentrate on what we are reading for a good while, you bet. But the content of an image can be grasped immediately. Moreover, it is often the images that are etched in our memory for a long time. This involves a great responsibility. In a text, one can describe different alternatives and use words like maybe and possibly in a way that does not undermine credibility. An image, on the other hand, must either be one or the other. It is not possible to present many variations at the same time, at least if the scene that is depicted is expected to look reasonably natural. Every time I look away, because I want to see the images, I lose my place, so I'll stop doing it. Regardless of new revolutionary methods, a visual reconstruction of a specific event or person who lived a long time ago is always a subjective interpretation. Facts are still scarce, and a lot of imagination is needed to create a full picture. Fortunately, most people understand that the main purpose is to provide food for thought and do not expect the image to represent an absolute truth in every detail. One might think that imagining and illustrating what people look like and how they lived thousands of years ago is a fairly harmless activity. However, it has turned out that many topics concerning our ancient past are now as politically and ideologically inflammable as they ever were before. That researchers are harassed because of their work is once again a sadly common occurrence, and scientific illustrators get their fair share of it. In a world in turmoil, it is easy to think that there are more important things to do than digging up old artifacts and trying to figure out what they meant to the people, who made them, and definitely more urgent matters to deal with than imagining the past and creating paintings about it. But then again, following our innate curiosity that has led to what we call science and creating art in its various forms are the exact things that has made us what we are, for better or worse. The responsibility and dilemma lies in remaining honest, while at the same time avoiding that new findings and communicating them to the public can be distorted to achieve various political goals and doing harm in the process. Staying neutral when assessing and interpreting scientific results is a challenge for both scientists and artists. It is not unusual to see headlines announcing that everything we have thought we knew about human prehistory must be rewritten based on new findings, often somehow suggesting that the public has been previously lied to for some murky reason. It is certainly true that the gaps in our knowledge are frequently filled with new information, sometimes seemingly overthrowing earlier conclusions. It can be frustrating to realize how something we thought was solidly proven as a fact and that we have repeated in many contexts suddenly changes. It can even require that a lot of our own work should indeed be adjusted or, as in my case, repainted. But that is the risk that must be taken, and I would be more worried if it were not so. It is the inevitable part of the process. I myself try to find solace in the fact that although we can never know the complete truth, every discovery brings us closer to it. I'm very honoured to receive this award, which in a way completes a circle on my path in scientific illustration work and emphasises the importance that the Prehistoric Society has had on my endeavours. Sincerely, Tom. And yes, thank you to Tom. He raises so many issues in that, in terms of what we believe, what is the truth, how we base our evidence, or how we base our interpretations. And in the few times that I do give lectures and talk to students and members of the public, I always say, don't believe a word I'm saying, check it out, but it's my interpretation of the evidence as of now. And I thought it's fascinating there that somehow he felt that as scientists talking to the public about some change that they'd previously been lied to. And that's obviously something that we have to bear in mind. So I think that concludes the awards, doesn't it? So we have 10 minutes before. I mean, it's not fair to start early because some people won't be coming onto Zoom until 5. Is that fair to say? Possibly. So I think it's worth having a talk amongst yourselves, tell jokes, wander. Oh, you've got a question? Yes,
Yeah.
that's Tom. Yeah.
Instagram. I use Tom Bjorkman. So
BJO with the double umlaut thing on the top. RKLUND. He's suddenly going to get a whole lot more followers, isn't he? Mm. Oh, the book on the Neanderthals, reimagining. No, what's it called? Yeah, reimagining. Kindred. Yeah, I did Kindred. Yeah.
The knowledge we have at the moment.
Yeah.
And usually our specific sites. So if you know, I didn't have time. I only got sent these yesterday. They will actually relate to actual archaeological findings.
Yeah, they're super. Aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's Finland. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's based in Finland. And forgive my voice, I had a weekend singing in Kendal and I'm a bit husky. Yeah, so
I'll get that one.
forgot to give him a. Great. Right, the clock has clicked around to 5 o'clock. So just a couple of things to say before I introduce tonight's speaker. This is the Sara Champion Memorial Lecture. I don't know how many of you in the room ever knew Sara, but not only was she a fantastic archaeologist, I think I first met her in 1974 when I was literally just a boy, and working on a site that her husband Tim was excavating. Tim unfortunately can't be here. He's generally always been at the things, but sadly he's got a bad back and he's actually in hospital. But not only was Sara an amazing person, an amazing archaeologist, she ran the best discos at every conference ever and on excavations as well. And sadly died too young, but this was set up by the Prehistoric Society, I think when Tim was president, in her memory. So it's great to be here after all these years, having known the Champion family for such a long time. So it's a very important occasion in the calendar for the Prehistoric Society. And the other thing to say is that in my past, I did have an MPhil. I do have an MPhil in Paleolithic archaeology. So I'm really looking forward to Barbara's talk, which is Traces of Touch, from Paleolithic embodied markings to Amazonian decorated hands. So Dr. Barbara Oostervik of the University of Exeter, the floor is yours. And I hope the technology is at the moment so you can switch from one to the other. And the water's yours too.
Check it out first and I can ask Pavel if it doesn't work.
And then maybe move the microphone near you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Yeah. Yay. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here, all of you. Thank you, Bob, for that introduction. I'm going to stand a little bit closer so you can hear me well. I'm very excited to be able to tell you about my research, which is the last 7 years, basically, my PhD and then my postdoc. And I'm going to start with a personal story. I'm deep inside Ordales Cave in southern Spain, following a winding, slippery path towards one of its most remote chambers. The ceiling is low, the air is thin, and then climbing up a narrow ledge, there they are. 2 red handprints, not stenciled, not placed, dragged, fingers trailing down as though melting into the rock. Intimate and familiar, but also eerie, like someone is slipping down that narrow ledge, trying to hold on to the wall with all their might. I want to climb closer, but the hands are too high up and it's too slippery and steep. If I try, I might break my legs. So I start to wonder, why here in this hidden and inaccessible place? And what did it feel like to press your hands against that cold rock in the dark? So today's lecture is about a particular kind of rock art, what I call embodied markings. These are traces and gestures made with the body and through the body, a concept that I developed during my PhD at Durham. They're not just images on a surface, but the results of direct tactile engagement, what I think of as the archaeology of touch. They speak to how people explored underground spaces with their senses and how they left fragments of their bodies behind. I'll begin by introducing what I mean with these embodied markings and also the 7 categories that I've identified. From there, I will guide you through 4 case studies, 3 from Paleolithic Europe, so caves with embodied markings, and then 1 from the Colombian Amazon, Cerro Azul, which is an open-air rock art site that has handprints that are decorated. Along the way, I'll share some of the methods and experimental work that I've used to better understand these gestures, and I will also discuss the broader theoretical implications, so what these markings reveal about sensory engagement and liminality in subterranean spaces. And finally, I will close with a brief reflection of where this research is heading and what still remains to be explored. So rock art is usually divided into figurative and non-figurative motifs. Figurative motifs, animals or human figures, are usually interpreted in symbolic or ecological terms. And in contrast, non-figurative imagery consists of shapes without obvious reference or abstract forms. So in my research, I shift the focus away from what these marks look like and towards how they were made and experienced. So what I call embodied markings are non-figurative traces made both with the body and through the body. So some are literal imprints, like stencils and handprints. Others are gestures made visible, finger dots, finger lines, and pigments sprayed by the mouth. And the key is to move beyond interpretation as representation and instead think of these as acts, making, doing, and feeling. And this is what I mean by approaching them through the archaeology of touch, taking touch and gesture seriously as part of the archaeological record. So rather than asking what these marks meant, I want to ask how they were made, but also what it felt like to make them. So I identified 7 main types of embodied markings. They range from the most direct traces of the body, hand stencils and handprints, to more gestural forms such as sprayed discs, finger lines, finger dots. And beyond these, there are broader surface treatments, so we have smeared and sprayed surfaces. And each of these types of marking involve a bodily act. Hand stencils combine touch and breath. Handprints record the grip of a palm against a rock. And discs are created through cupping the hands and spraying pigments upwards, while finger lines and finger dots drag and tap across rock surfaces. Smears spread pigment with the whole hand or the fingers, and then sprays coat the walls with breath. So together, these are not just technical categories. They form a vocabulary of touch, pressing, dragging, smearing, breathing, through which people engaged with the cave environments. And for today, I'll use these categories as a framework, but I want to show you how these gestures kind of operated within particular caves, where the character of this space shaped how people touched and marked the rock. So first, a quick note on methodology. The aim of my PhD was to reveal the embodied and sensory character of these non-figurative markings. And to do this, I combined photogrammetry with D-Stretch, which is a color enhancement program. And together, these methods improve visibility, making faint markings clearer and revealing details such as halos of pigments or small droplets of paint that are left behind when paint was sprayed with the mouth. I created over 80 3D models of the 3 caves, and then I applied D-Stretch to enhance the color contrasts. This helped identify production techniques, so were markings produced by fingers, by hands, or sprayed by the mouth, but also how these markings interacted with the topography of the cave, where they placed on or near cracks, in concaves, on flowstone formations, or other speleothems, which are formations in the cave. And I also analyzed variables such as proximity to other markings, visibility under low lights, and accessibility. So if they were hidden or prominently placed, and whether producing these markings required climbing or crouching or even crawling, or if they could be reached without effort. So the first cave we visit is Peshmerla, located in the Lot region in southern France, which in the Paleolithic was a refuge for human groups. Use of the cave spans the Cretaceous to the Silurian, which is roughly between 25,000 and 15,000 years ago. The cave is famous for its striking figurative paintings. You know, we have of Ice Age animals, mammoth, cave lion, horses. But alongside these, we find numerous non-figurative markings. And what is particularly interesting is the contrast in color. So animals are almost always painted in black, while the non-figurative imagery is always painted in red. Well, this panel is perhaps the most famous, the black spotted horses, but alongside the animals are a remarkable variety of non-figurative marks. We find 6 black hand stencils, over 200 black discs that have a lot of variation in their shape, and nearly 30 red discs. So these were sprayed with the mouth through a stencil or perhaps a hollow bone. Most unusually, we found 7 thumb stencils, red thumb stencils. You can see those on that's the 3D model with the de-stretch filter below it. Yeah, and these must have been really difficult to produce, like a really awkward hand position like this, and then a very, yeah, kind of careful control of breath that you need to. And there's only one other cave that I know of in France, actually at Gargat in the Pyrenees. But this panel is also a palimpsest. So you find all these layers of markings that are superimposed. You find the horses, then you have the hands, the discs, and underneath it all, we find a fish made out of finger dots, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so Peshmerla also displays a lot of sprayed discs. Nearly 460 examples are spread throughout the cave. The largest concentrations are found in Combel, which is the deepest and most inaccessible space of the cave. So here, as you can see, discs are positioned following or framing the contours of the ceilings and the other formations. And in some cases, the pigment has run. So in the image on the lower left, you can see that these drips of paint have kind of trickled down the wall. And then we also find some of these discs actually lie beneath later imagery, such as the panel of the lines that you can see in the top. So here we have, you can see that the colors are different. So the discs have a different color, and this tells us that they were probably earlier. So like the unusual thumb stencils that I showed earlier, other markings at Peshmerla seem to have an experimental character. So on the right, for instance, we see a hand outline. So it's traced rather than sprayed. It's like likely drawn with a small crayon surrounding the outlines of the hand. And in the lower left, we have an illustration that also comes from the Chamber of Combel, where cave bears once had their dens. And here finger lines appear right alongside cave bear scratch marks. So human finger lines are mimicking the cave bears, which is a striking juxtaposition of both human and animal gestures inscribed on the same surface. And then there are also the so-called speckles. You see those in the top left. So these are very small clusters of pigment that could have been made either by spraying with the mouth or by dabbing a brush-like utensil against the wall and kind of releasing pigments. So these suggest that the people at Peshmerla were not just reproducing familiar gestures, but also experimenting with new ways of leaving traces. We also find more subtle traces, so sets of finger lines, sometimes arranged in groups. On ceilings, clusters of finger dots appear, while you also see some markings that are thickly smeared that kind of almost stamp it in between finger lines and finger dots. Like the image in the top right, well, you can kind of see it. It actually has an outline of a mammoth on top of it in black pigment. So now we move to Cantabria in northern Spain, which has one of the most densest concentrations of Paleolithic art in the world. El Castillo is a large cave located on Monte Castillo, which is a conical hill honeycombed with over 43 caves, 5 of which contain Paleolithic art. The site has an exceptionally long occupation history, over 150,000 years, which spans Neanderthals and modern humans. And some of the paintings here are among the earliest known in Europe. Uranium-thorium dating indicates that the hand stencils at ceiling of the hands have minimum ages of 37,500 years, while the discs on the panel range between 31,000 and 35,700 years. So like at Peshmerla, El Castillo displays a hand outline, seen in the lower left, but in this case, the hand is encircled with a thick finger line. So they use their fingers to trace it. And also you can see that the middle finger is actually missing. El Castillo also preserves about 80 hand stencils, and research by Paul Pettit and colleagues show that 80% of these were carefully placed in relation to the cave's topography, so on ridges, on cracks, and in hollows. And some occur even in impractical or hard-to-reach spots, which suggests that they were deliberately placed, but others appear also to be grabbing onto surfaces in concave shapes. They cluster more on the right side of the cave, which indicates either pattern choices or perhaps, poor preservation in the side of the cave. And overall, the hand stencils at El Castillo seem to have a more public character. They're often highly visible and located in spaces that are relatively easy to access, as well as being placed in a way that indicates that they may mark pathways through the cave. El Castillo also contains at least 317 sprayed discs, and likely there are a lot more. And these discs are concentrated in the deeper, most inaccessible spaces of the cave. So particularly in the Gallery of the Discs and Sala Final, which is about a 30-minute walk into the cave. And pigment analysis here has shown that different types of pigments and mixing techniques were used. Some were very powdery, others were more liquid. And this suggests that there was careful preparation, but also repeated episodes of marking. And what is most striking with these sprayed discs is their placement. So they are found, again, in the most inaccessible areas of the caves, where discs are virtually the only motif found. They're positioned directly on speleothems, so on draperies, on stalactite columns, on surfaces hanging off the ceiling. And often these discs are framed perfectly with the natural contours of the rock, as you can see in the images. And many are located also in places that are difficult or even dangerous to reach. So near steep inclines, near drops, or at points of strong contrast between spaces. So their positioning suggests that both the act of making and the chosen location was central to their meaning. And alongside the discs, we also find areas where pigment has been sprayed directly onto surfaces. So for a long time, these were interpreted as surfaces that were smeared with the hands and the fingers. But when we analyzed these 3D models with D-Stretch, we found that these surrounding splatters, these small droplets of paints became visible, which tells us that they weren't smeared, but they were projected with the mouth. And again, these sprayed surfaces are found in close relationship to the natural topography and exclusively in these deepest and most inaccessible spaces of the cave. Then also we find finger dots, finger lines, and smeared surfaces at El Castillo, and these are also found in clear relation to the natural topography. So finger dots are often placed on the edges of formations, such as overhangs, while finger lines are dragged down vertical surfaces. Smears and clustered finger dots sometimes frame natural circular or triangular shapes in ceilings, such as you can see in the lowermost images. So yeah, and then also, yeah, this is one of my favorite spots in El Castillo is actually the topmost image shows this natural depression that you have near the entrance that was used as kind of a paint pot. So this shows how people, the cave kind of provided both the surface and the materials for marking. You can kind of see them dipping their fingers in there and just being. So finally, we have Ardales. So Ardales is a large cave system in southern Spain, about 60 kilometers from Malaga. It lies within a striking pyramidal-shaped limestone hill and extends for more than 1.5 kilometers underground. Non-figurative markings make up nearly 90% of the imagery identified here. And again, like El Castillo, the cave has a long record of human presence from the Middle Paleolithic to the Neolithic. And stratified deposits include lithic artifacts such as Les Vaulois flakes, and these are lithics that Neanderthals used. So they date to around 58,000 years ago. And then we also find pieces of ochre that point to Neanderthal use. And several non-figurative markings appear directly above these layers, which strengthens the contextual link. And later visits are also attested during the Aurgnatian, the Gravettian, and the Solutrean. And then we find figurative engravings that are added to the repertoire. So we find a total of 9 handprints that are identified at Ardales, and most appear in isolation. So the 2 dragging handprints I showed you at the beginning, those are actually the only one that are a pair. So handprints are not placed randomly. Instead, they often seem to grab, grip, or closely engage with the rock. And on the right, we see this single handprint that's placed near the entrance. And you can see that it's placed directly over this large crack in the wall. And on the left, a handprint seems to kind of grab the folds of the stalactite column. It's also very high up, so it must have been difficult to reach. And then on the lower left, we see a very small handprint, possibly made by a child, which is carefully placed on a stalactite as well. And these last two are also found in very remote chambers in the cave. So the only two hand stencils at Ardalis are found inside the central drapery, which is this tall crystal-covered calcite formation that has a very prominent position in the cave. Today we reach it by a ladder, but in the Paleolithic, climbing up there must have been quite difficult. It required a lot of effort. And the stencils are not only high up, they're also hidden. They're hidden in a narrow niche. You have to crawl inside to see them. And both are painted in black, which is also kind of rare for non-frictive markings in the cave. And they appear to grip this concave surface. And what is also interesting is that actually both have the pinky and the ring finger bent. So this suggests that they could be made by the same individual. And strikingly, we find nothing else here. So it's just these two hand stencils and then no other markings. This is a particularly striking example of finger lines that seem to grab onto the edge of it's actually my favorite, it's one of my favorite markings in the cave. The feature itself is very low to the ground. As you can see, it's quite hidden. You really have to search to find it. And what is powerful here is that the lines don't just simply follow the rocks. They curve over the edge as though the person was physically gripping onto the surface. So once again, no other images are found about. This is the only marking that you find there. And then here we see some striking examples of finger lines that are dragged across the cave surface. So on the far left, 3 fingers were pulled downwards for at least 20 centimeters, while the thumb and the pinky were probably held back like this. Then in the center, we find these 2 hands that are placed side by side and dragged down together. And its dragging and gripping quality is characteristic for Ardalis. So we find 14 examples that show clear gestures of grabbing, while 6 display dragging motions. And another intriguing pattern at Ardalis is the frequent occurrence of finger lines and finger dots arranged in sets of 3. And it seems that it could also be related to that gesture of holding the thumb and the pinky back and kind of leaving only the middle 3 fingers behind. So lastly, we find at least 10 examples in Ardalis where surfaces have been directly sprayed with pigments without the use of a stencil or a guiding shape. Again, this is evident because of the fine droplets of paint that surround the markings. So in this image, I'm documenting one of these sprayed surfaces, which is a large drapery that's hanging from the ceiling. The shape is completely covered in pigments, and it's located 3 meters above ground. So today we can only access it by scaffolding, but in the Paleolithic, this would have required climbing or the use of very long bone tubes to kind of project upwards. We don't really know. It's a mystery. So these sprayed surfaces occur throughout the caves, often on speleothems, ceilings, or tucked deep into folds and crevasses. And these locations are hidden or difficult to reach often, which suggests that their purpose was not visibility, but rather this intimate tactile engagement with the cave surface. So the red pigment sprayed across these low-hanging calcite formations that you can see on the left, they were applied during multiple episodes. So uranium thorium dating showed that pigment was sprayed on these draperies 65,500 years ago, again between 48,000 and 45,000 years ago, and then once more around 32,000 years ago. So this indicates that different groups of different humans and generations returned to Ardalis while maintaining a shared marking tradition over tens of millennia. So when we look across these 3 case studies, clear patterns emerge. At Ardalis, the most striking are the gestures. So we have hands and fingers that drag down or grab onto formations, and this triplet motif that recurs at thresholds and niches, tracking cracks and edges and ridges. And at El Castillo, these discs and sprayed pigments concentrate on speleothems in deep liminal chambers. These have a hidden and personal character, and they're often placed in difficult or even dangerous locations. The framing of discs, pigment, and dots on these speleothems is especially striking, while hand stencils appear to have a more public character. And at Peshmerla, these stencils also are mainly found in invisible spaces, and then we find finger dots and finger lines that trace to more concealed formations. Sprayed discs, once again, frame specific formations in less accessible areas. So despite these kind of subtle differences, embodied markings in the three caves, they share common traits. Gestures are repeated and consistently placed on transitional features. They mark pathways through the cave, are placed near thresholds, the beginning or endings of spaces, or places where the character of the cave changes. So they are found either by themselves or with their counterparts, and not as complementary markings to figurative paintings. Actually, they appear to be completely separate from figurative imagery. They have an experimental and playful character, such as the thumb stencils and the hand outlines. They are performative acts, so it's grabbing, this dragging, touching, and spraying that leave behind biographical traces. So this leads me to the broader theoretical implications that I explored during my research, which unfortunately I can't go into that much for today. So in the case study caves, the repeated gestures of embodied markings are not randomly distributed. They're consistently found on transitional features, formations in the cave that stand out, contrast with their surroundings, or are placed at the borders or the edges of formations. Light and dark, inside and outside, sound and silence. But within caves like Peshmerla and Ardales and El Castillo, these oppositions are amplified. They are layered and they're intensified. Flat paths shift into sudden drops, stalactites and draperies emerge out of the darkness. And in this shifting landscape, people moved by touch. So when vision failed, the hands and the fingers become the primary way to perceive and to navigate. And it's precisely on these perceptual thresholds that embodied markings appear. They wrap around ledges, trace concavities, or are placed at the edges of formations. So in marking these spaces, people transformed the cave surface into something responsive and meaningful. So the surface of the cave became an extension of the body. So now we move from deep caves with embodied markings to the open air rock art side of Cerro Azul, and from touching surfaces to the hand as a canvas itself, and from Europe all the way to the Colombian Amazon. So Cerro Azul is a striking table mountain, or tepuy, with a prominent position in the Guaviare landscape. It lies right at the ecological transition between tropical rainforest and open savanna, near the Guayabera River. And as part of my postdoctoral research at the University of Exeter, during which I worked for the Last Journey project, I was responsible for documenting and recording the rock art of Cerro Azul. And this work placed the site within broader questions about the earliest peopling of South America, while also opening up perspective of how people engaged with these dramatic landscapes. So the cliffs of Cerro Azul are covered with 5,000 paintings, likely more, distributed across 12 major panels. The largest of these, Mas Largo, stretches over 100 meters in length and a height of about 10 meters. So on the right, you can see an aerial view of the tepuy showing how all the panels are kind of spread across the different faces of the cliff. And before looking more closely at the images that we find here, I'd like to pause briefly on the question of chronology. So excavations at Cerro Montoya and at nearby sites were carried out between 2015 and 2018, with a focus on the earliest human presence in the region. We find 4 phases of occupation, spanning from the late Pleistocene to the late Holocene. And the earliest evidence places human arrival in this part of the Amazon at around 12,600 years ago, making it one of the earliest settled regions in South America. So by at least 10,200 years ago, people were producing pigments to paint. And we know this because exfoliated fragments of painted wall were found within this stratigraphy. So a layer which also contained a hearth that could be C14 dated to 10,200 years ago. However, this layer also contained a large number of ochre pieces with use wear. And most of these pieces were analyzed together with Linda at the University of Exeter using a Hyrox microscope. And you can see some of the images below. So after analysis, several appear to display these clear traces of use wear, which is linked to pigment production. And when you kind of rub two pieces of ochre together to create powder, they develop very distinctive striations. And those were among the kinds that we found on the ochre pieces. So for the last journey project, one of my key tasks was to establish typologies of the rock arts. I used an Arctech 3D laser scanner, and as you can see, it looks a bit like Wall-E. And I mapped 12 panels, and this method turned out to be quite excellent to capture very high resolution imagery. The data was then processed with software and combined with D-Stretch, which allowed us to examine superimpositions and subtle pigment differences much more clearly. Alongside this, I also experimented with infrared photography and portable XRF to explore pigment composition. And last year, we went back to Serra Azul with colleagues from the Polytechnic University of Tomar in Portugal to take samples of the paintings for multispectral analysis. We took over 30 samples, and these will give us information about the types of pigment used and the paint recipes, and we are still waiting eagerly for the results. Here's an overview of the typologies that I identified. So we have anthropomorphic figures or human forms, zoomorphic figures, animals, and then we find floral motifs, images of plants and flowers, which are very rare in rock art worldwide, but quite common at Serra Azul. We're currently writing up the publication for this. And then we find a range of geometric and non-figurative images. And then, of course, the handprints. So with so much going on at the site and not a lot of time, I had to decide where to begin. And since I'm a little bit obsessed with embodied markings, I naturally went straight for the handprints. And what is interesting at Serra Azul, I identified almost 500 handprints across 6 panels. And what is striking is the dominance of decorated handprints. So out of a total of 496 examples, 348, about 70% are decorated. And every time I return to the sites, I find more, which is very annoying. So yeah, you have to stop at a certain point. So here you can see the classificatory scheme that I developed together with my colleague, Joe Osborne. And this outlines the 13 different types of decorated handprints. And it gave us a framework to start comparing not just the local variation, but possibly cross-cultural parallels. So in the next part, I will walk you through these types, and I will show you how they connect to wider traditions of hand marking around the world. So first, we have standard handprints, where the hand was dipped in paint and then pressed directly into the wall. And normally this would leave gaps in the palm and between fingers. But what is interesting here is that the majority of these handprints don't show those gaps. Instead, they seem to have been retouched or even repainted after the initial impression, making the print much more solid. And these standard types are often placed high on the wall and usually have this faded orange-red pigment. The largest category of decorated handprints at Serra Azul are the spirals. And out of the 348 decorated hands, 256, again, about 70% fall into this group. There are four main variations. So we have standard spirals with a central hole, fine line spirals, and then braided spirals. And again, the standard hand stencil or standard hand spiral is by far the most common, and they appear on all the panels where we find handprints. This fine line spiral is unique to Las Dantas panel C, shown here on the left. And these spirals are made up of very fine lines, which at first we thought must have been created by using a template, so maybe a stamp or a fiber. But when I overlaid the spirals, they were actually, none of them matched. So instead, these fine lines were likely made using the fingernails. And in the lower left image, you can see, if you look closely, you can actually see the natural lines of the palm captured in the pigment. So this is strong evidence that, that these spirals were printed directly by the hand. And what is also fascinating is that it's not just a local phenomenon. So parallels for this fine line technique have been identified at Lajeado da Soledad in Brazil, as you can see here on the lower left. Another important category are the handprints with linear motifs. So these come in three main forms: vertical lines, horizontal lines, or a combination of both. And the lines extend into the fingers often. And in many examples, you can see a clear open space in the palm. And this suggests that the decoration wasn't just confined to the surface of the palm of the hand, but also carefully structured to emphasize different zones of the hand and fingers. And again, we find parallels of these in Brazil and across North America, in Arizona and in California. And here we see handprints with elliptical lines. So in this type, rounded concentric lines are placed in the palm, and then they extend upwards into the fingers. And what is very striking here is that these elliptical handprints represent one of the most widespread traditions of decorated hands in world block art. So we see them in Brazil, in North America, both Texas and Utah, as well as in South Africa and in Australia. And what is striking is not just their wide distribution, but also how similar they are in form and likely in production technique. So in Australia, experimental research by Robert Gunn showed that the elliptical decorations were created by scratching into wet pigments with the fingernails. And it's very likely that the same technique was used for at least some of the South American examples, and I will get back to this later. So handprints with zigzag lines are very rare. At Cerro Azul, we only have 5 examples, and the examples you see in the lower left come from the Principal panel, and notice how the fingers are double printed and then the thumbs are actually touching. And then you can also see that the hands were retouched or repainted quite quickly after the initial impression, which makes them stand out even more. And for a long time, I thought that this was actually a type unique to Cerro Azul, but I recently found a striking parallel at a site in northern Arizona, shown on the right. So this shows that even the rarest decorated hands have much wider connection than you might expect. And finally, we have a category of abstract hands. These are not literal prints of a hand pressed against the surface, but rather a stylized depiction that takes the form of a hand. They often combine painted hand motifs with additional elements such as concentric lines. For this also we find parallels in Venezuela and in Baja California in Mexico. So now I'll briefly summarize the results. So of the decorated handprints, spirals are by far the most common motif, 73%, followed by linear patterns. These motifs are rarely isolated. So most handprints appear in pairs or in small groups. A color distinction also emerges. So undecorated handprints tend to fade more quickly, while decorated examples are deeper red. In terms of placement, hands are usually found in the middle and upper sections of the panels in positions that often required climbing or scaffolding. At Mas Largo Bay, however, we find small children hands. They're often lower down. And you can see in the top right an example of a very small hand with my hand in comparison, and that's likely an infant's hand. And another interesting issue is retouching. So some decorated hands were clearly repainted after their initial creation, and the question remains, was this done immediately after printing or at a later moment, or both? And interpretation of these motifs is complicated due to their poor preservation. And to address these challenges, experimental work is crucial, and it gives us insight into both the production process and the long-term durability of these handprints. So the experimental work had several layers. Together with Linda, I carried out several experiments both in Colombia and in Exeter. So during a cultural heritage course for local guides and indigenous community members at Cerro Azul, which is part of the Last Journey project, we did several experiments with local ochre. We began by collecting ochre from several local sites, and when heated in the fire, the yellow ochres transformed into a vivid red, as you can see on the lower left. But also the red ochres became more workable after heating. So they breaking down more easily into a fine powder by just kind of bashing them with a rock. We then experimented with paint recipes. So we tested different binders and mixtures using local stone as a substrate. seen in the top right. So we could see how the pigments absorbed into the surface and how different preparations changed the color intensity, the texture, but also the durability. And what we also found is that several paint recipes wash off very quickly after exposure. So in the lower right, you can see how the finger dots on the substrate have already washed away very quickly after exposure. Yeah, they've been exposed for a little over a year. And we had similar results with parallel experiments in Exeter with similar rainy conditions. But these experiments gave us important insights into the choices and the knowledge that prehistoric artists may have drawn on when preparing their materials for painting. So in collaboration with our local partners, Victor Caicedo of the Sana descent and Ulrico Matapi, who's a ritual specialist of the Matapi group, we collected a range of natural materials using indigenous techniques. Among these was tree latex. You can see how we extracted it using indigenous techniques. Yeah, and the tree latex proves to be a very particularly effective binder for pigment. And during the cultural heritage workshop in Guaviare, when we worked alongside the local guides, we also experimented with paint recipes and application methods, as well as actually creating the art. And this collaborative work not only demonstrated the practical value of latex as a binder, but also what kind of different application techniques there are. And then again, it also provided inspiration for later research in Exeter, where we continued to test and refine these methods. So these experiments highlight how indigenous knowledge and practice directly informed our understanding of material preparation and also the possibilities of pigment use in rock art. So finally, one of the most intriguing challenges that we had with the decorated handprints was understanding exactly how certain decorations were produced, particularly the spirals and the fine line spirals. So together with Linda and several students and colleagues at Exeter, we carried out a series of experiments to explore different techniques of applying pigments to create these handprints. And we tested masking directly on the hand using templates such as raffia and large leaves, as well as masking with substances like latex and oils. And then we experimented with scraping pigments either before or after printing, both on the hand itself and directly on the rock surface. And finally, we tested the use of tools, sticks, fingernails to scrape away pigments and create lines. So these experiments gave us valuable insights, but it also showed us how difficult it can be to actually reproduce certain motifs. So the outcomes indicate that the hand had to be scratched with a stick or with a fingernail quickly after applying pigments to the hand, because the paint dries extremely fast. It's very difficult to scrape pigments off after the hand is transferred to the rock surface. And also it's difficult for paint to transfer from the center of the palm and the base of the fingers, which again indicates that the hands were retouched immediately after printing. Masking agents or templates were largely unsuccessful, and producing motifs with latex on the hand or on the surface created these fine line handprints. Parallel experiments also indicated that the paint recipes wash off the rock very quickly after exposure to the elements. So it seems very likely that the handprints were touched up and repainted to complete designs, but also to maintain them. So I need to wrap it up. For embodied markings, I focused on tree caves, but similar gestures and placements appear in other caves across Southwestern Europe and likely globally. One category that deserves further attention are these sprayed surfaces, that they seem to be far more common than previously thought. Several small caves in both southern and northern Spain contain only sprayed surfaces, suggesting that it was a very widespread form of engagement. So for now, I've not heard of any directly sprayed surfaces outside of Europe. And also I've only briefly touched on the broader diversity of embodied markings. So beyond handprints beyond handprints, we have palm prints in the Ardèche. We have hand outlines, we have thumb stencils, we have finger flutings in which the fingers were traced across the soft surfaces of caves, which are globally distributed. So all of these invite comparative study through the lens of gesture and touch. Decorated handprints have a global distribution that needs to be further explored, as well as more experimental research on creation. And interesting to note here is actually that these decorated hands are completely absent from Paleolithic caves. And finally, one of my next steps is more experimental research. So I'll be looking more closely at how embodied markings, especially sprayed ones, were produced. And that includes testing pigment recipes, mouth spraying techniques, and also how kind of exploring how these gestures may have felt like to perform. So yeah, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, you can ask me any question when I get my glass of wine.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That was fascinating. And I've got so many questions, starting with the spraying. That must have been fun. Paleolithic straws. How did it work? We'll talk about it over alcohol.
Yes.
So I hope everybody on Zoom enjoyed that as much as we did in the room. There are no questions, so we're going to have to ask Barbara all the questions over alcohol. Linda said there's no vote of thanks because you can't keep archaeologists from a glass of wine for too long. But I do want to say thank you for a really stimulating lecture and a world tour too. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks, Barbara.
Glory.